Welcome to our 47th podcast. Today, we'll be talking about building trust with our very special guest, Alix Prassas. What's the one thing you can do now to strengthen trust in your key workplace relationships? Keep listening to find out. Welcome to Harmonious Workplaces, a podcast about corporate culture, organizational change management, and workplace behavior. Harmonious Workplaces was started by independent consultants Rich Cruz, Ben Kleinman, and Cheryl Volpe to explore, challenge, and build on various organizational culture and change management concepts. It's a blend of theory and practice based on their personal and professional experiences working with companies of all sizes across various industries. If you own a business, lead a team, want new ideas about the corporate environment, or just want to listen to a group of consultants talking about how to make work more enjoyable, we invite you to sit back, relax, and dive in with us to Harmonious Workplaces. Hello, Harmonious Workplaces listeners. As always, we're so glad to have you with us. I'm Rich Cruz. I'm an organizational development consultant. Welcome to Harmonious Workplaces. I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Cheryl Volpe. Hi, Cheryl.
Hi, Rich. Hi, everyone.
And Ben Kleinman.
Hey, everyone.
And we have a special guest. Oh, we're so happy to have you. Hi, Alix. How are you? This is Alix Prassas. Good morning. How are things?
Hi, everyone. Things are going well.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, Alix, we're going to be bringing you here to talk about building trust today. Is that right?
It is.
Awesome. Cool. All right. Well, let's dig in and build some trust, huh? So, but Alix, first, can you give us a little bit about your background and where you come from and just give us the Alix show here.
Sure. I'll never turn down an opportunity for the Alix show. So, hi, everyone. My background is a few different things. So it's across HR, org design and development, change management, and DEI was my last internal role. And I'm currently actually doing consulting around org design and culture, which I'm incredibly passionate about. I also am an adjunct professor in the Master's in IO Psychology program at the Chicago School. And I actually am pursuing a PhD. I'm officially a PhD candidate now. Pursuing a PhD in organizational leadership within their business psychology department. And specifically, my research is on building trust. So as you can imagine, I'm very excited to talk about this topic, any opportunity.
Mm-hmm. That's so cool. That's
a lot. That's great. How do you do it?
I don't know.
Yeah, and right? I didn't even get into some of the other things I have going on. One thing at a time.
Right on. Cool. Well, I mean, we talk about change management a lot in our podcast, of course, and that trust element. I think was it Gallup had a study not too long ago that like 70% of an employee's success is determined by the relationship with their manager, and a lot of that has to do with trust, right? So, I'm glad we have an expert on that because it's so needed right now. There's so many people they don't trust. They're afraid they're going to lose their jobs. They're afraid that something's going to go awry, right? So, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just curious. Maybe if go ahead, Alix.
Yeah, I mean, and building on that, right? Trust has dropped dramatically. So, for instance, the latest iteration of the Edelman Trust Barometer came out, and the proportion of employees who fear that their business leaders are misleading them has dropped by 12 points since 2021. So, it's interesting because the beginning of the pandemic, I think there's probably a number of reasons for this, but trust actually strengthened quite a bit. Because, everyone just had kind of work to concentrate on, right? We're all at home, like working from home, and people were kind of looking to their leaders to help guide them through this. So So we definitely had a quite a high there, but it's dropped dramatically, and it's for organizations to really be able to keep coming out on top, and in a very changing world, I think it's going to be really important for them to figure this out. I mean, I trust organizations do perform well. There's been numerous studies around that. They perform better than their peers. So, on top of that, their folks are more engaged as well. So, definitely a very important topic. And when you talk about change management, without trust, who's going to want to adopt the change, right? If you don't know where the trust is coming from, why you're doing it, trust is already scary. It already kind of triggers fear in our brains. So, all really important considerations when we're thinking about this.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's interesting that the trust was strengthened during COVID. And I think part of that was if you were working from home, there was a level of care there, right? You were home because it's safer. And we were all sort of in that together. And there was a camaraderie with that, right? So that is interesting. But then it flipped because people want to stay at home. And then the trust levels with having to come into the office, that's a whole different environment that we're in now.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
Right.
interesting.
Yep.
Alex, I'm curious if you could share a little bit about your experience in terms of how one builds trust, if that's something that's almost like a formula that one might use, or how you might measure trust. You mentioned that that was something that research shows that organizations that have higher trust tend to do better, outperform their peers. How does one measure trust organizationally or interpersonally? I know that's many
So
different directions, but
yeah. So I think the first part, right? How do you build trust? It really is about building connection, right? And that actually is on
mm,
both sides. So Rich mentioned earlier, manager and employee, like that relationship. But the thing about building connection is um, what it does is it primes you to feel like that person is part of your in group. And, because obviously we have like all these, natural biases that we don't even, realize that's literally how our brain functions. And really to keep us safe in a lot of ways is we do have these biases, right? So bias itself is not a bad word. It's just, we need to know how our brain functions in order to kind of mitigate any negative ramifications, really doing the work to build connection. And it's interesting that, a lot of organizations, leaders might interpret that as, oh, that means we need to be back in the office together. It needs to be in person. But actually,
right.
most studies have actually shown there's no difference in trust levels, between virtual and in person. Visibility is the key. And visibility can happen
That makes
or
sense.
not happen, no matter which location you're in.
Mhm.
So you've got to do the work to really be available to have conversations. Get, like, oh, don't want to have too many one-to-ones, or we don't have anything to meet about. Like, think about like, hey, could you, use that space instead to just connect with each other, right? Do you have the tools to
Mm.
foster connection? So that's a really key piece of it. Is if I could give any advice, right, it truly is building connection. Obviously that's more on the kind of one-to-one, right? From an organizational lens, there's really kind of depends on which avenue we're looking at, but just to kind of give some high level thoughts around that. So cascading goals, bringing people together kind of around a common purpose. And they even
Mm.
talk about how do you navigate leading diverse teams, and diverse, I mean, in any respect, right? If you have a global team, that's a diverse team, right? So, with that, the best thing you can do is rally around that mutual goal. So those are the types of things when everyone knows that they are working towards the same thing, that builds that camaraderie, that connection, that trust, right? So
Sure.
that's a piece of it. And then, being consistent in communication. It's okay to say, I don't know. Making sure that you are thinking about transparency, and transparency doesn't mean you share every single thing, right? There's a lot of considerations, but if you don't know, just say you don't know, right? Like, this is where we're at right now. It could change tomorrow. And really just being incredibly thoughtful and intentional about the conversation, and not just glossing over if you misspoke previously, just owning it and saying, this is where we were at, thought it was going to go this direction. However, we need to pivot. And,
Hmm.
not just thinking that you can just move forward if trust has been broken, or, there's been reason given to be hesitant about whether they can trust you, or trust the organization. Really acknowledging head on and doing the work, to repair, and understanding that trust is tenuous. It is a constant
Mm,
effort, right? It's not something that you can
for
take for
sure.
granted. It is something that you always need to be evaluating.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. And when you push those conversations under because they're uncomfortable, right? When you know that something happened that has compromised your trust with someone, having that conversation, taking it head on, as you suggested, and going there and doing the work to address it. When that doesn't happen repeatedly, that leads to the toxic situation, right? And the lack of psychological safety to say, I don't know, that is out the window when that happens over time,
Yeah. And, you brought
right?
up
Yeah.
psychological safety. And unfortunately, a lot of people interpret that as we never disagree. And, and everyone's nice to each other.
Right.
We're cordial and we never disagree. Therefore, we have a psychologically safe environment. And that is not at all what Amy Edmondson and many other researchers were talking about when they were talking about psychological safety. It's actually the freedom to disagree in a way that you still feel safe, right? So as
Absolutely.
I always tell managers, if there's no conflict in your teams, you're not like you're missing something. You're actually not doing
Right,
something right. Like
right,
that's something that you should
right.
foster. And conflict is not to be. It's not about conflict resolution. It's about conflict management. Because you should constantly be
Sure.
fostering conflicting
Right.
voices and viewpoints. And when you do that, that's actually how you build trust. It's not just, oh, everyone's just cordial with each other. Because there's a lot of folks who are
Right.
maybe saying, they're always nice to me, but I don't know if they're really agreeing with me or not. You know what I mean? I feel like everyone kind of has that natural, like,
Right.
Yeah.
do we really all agree
Right.
with each other? Or, is there something else going on here?
Right.
So
Right.
keeping that
Yeah.
in
Is
mind
this
as
Are,
well.
is this the
are they
accommodation type of
Right.
conflict resolution
Right.
or yeah,
right?
right.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
Are they nice to me when I'm out of the room?
Yeah.
Makes sense. Let's do this. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, I'd like to ask a question about communication, if you don't mind, because that's a topic that we talk about a lot here, and you talked about that and previously. I'd like to dive into that just a little bit more, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay, we'll
And
be right
and
back. Oh, go
we're
ahead, Dave.
still
What
not
were you
off the
saying?
hook in terms of measuring trust.
Ah, yes. Okay, measuring. Yes.
2 teasers. Don't go anywhere.
All right, right on. Okay, folks, we'll be right back. At Harmonious Workplaces, we believe work should provide purpose, satisfaction, and growth. We empower people to thrive by fostering environments where individuals can find meaning in their work and organizations can succeed through thoughtful, well-executed strategies. We're committed to making work better for the people who do it and the leaders who guide them. To discover how harmonious workplaces can impact your organization, visit www.harmoniousworkplaces.com and book a free 30-minute information session with one of our consultants today. Again, that's www.harmoniousworkplaces.com. And we're back. So we've been talking with Alix about building trust in our organizations, and while you were talking about building trust, you were talking about communication and how virtual teams and in office teams, right? That there have been studies that show that they have not identical but similar levels of trust. Is that right? Did I get that?
Yeah, the location does not, it's not an indicator that there's going to be higher or lower trust, right?
Yeah, yeah. But do you think that is that because of the technology that we have, where we have, we've talked about communication in the past, right? And we've got all different types of that. But certainly in person is the richest form of communication. You have body language, you have your distance from the person in the room, and all that's, so as well as audio and visual cues, right? Do you think that with our Zooms and all the other Teams and all those other types of software that allow us to have these video interactions, do you think that is why that the studies show that there's that communication? It's just seems to be that we have kind of a rich form of communication because we can see each other and we can see how we bob and weave and divert our eyes when we're watching a video instead of paying attention to.
Yeah. No, I mean, do I think if I was reading any studies that had been done in the early 2000s that it would be the same, that you would have same trust levels, no matter the location? No, I do think there is something to it, especially when you have different countries, right, that maybe are a little bit more high context and more kind of
Right.
indirect communication style where body language is really key. Absolutely. Without this technology, I don't think you can kind of extricate technology from this. I think that's an important consideration. And so with that, right, like making sure that you do have the right tools. The fact is that there are the tools out there, right? So that's not an excuse that, like,
Yeah.
oh, well, the technology doesn't support, how we can truly build connection. I mean, I have, someone I used to work with, I consider her one of my closest friends, and I've never met her in person. Like
The
that's,
three of us
you're
have never met in person. These
right.
podcast hosts here have yet to. We're 47 episodes in, and a whole lot of other hijinks, and a book and all that stuff, and we haven't yet.
Well,
I aim
and
to change that in 2025, folks.
yeah,
Yeah, one of
It's
our goals is to meet in person.
Yeah.
it's one of our goals. But to your point, Alex, I think about Rich and Ben all the time. We work together all the time. We're in touch around the clock. And I feel like we know each other very well, but
and yet
it is
you
true.
probably worked in
We
an
haven't been
office
in
with
person.
someone who you would never speak to outside of, you know what I mean? Like, or you don't trust, right? I mean, so it's really interesting. And I think part of it is, there's a vulnerability when you've got a camera in your home, right? So there's a level
Sure.
of shared vulnerability, and connection that's made because it's like, pets, kids, anyone could just kind of pop up, right? And you like get to know a little bit more about people's lives in a way that, when we come into the office, whether we realize it or not, we have a bit of a shield around us, right? We're in office mode. So, it's maybe not as natural to open up in the same way that you might virtually. Not always. But it's just really interesting. I feel like, again, people get so concentrated on it has to be in person. That's how we build better teams. That's how we have greater collaboration. When really, it's just more about what is the effort we're putting into connecting our folks, connecting with each other, being
Right.
visible, having an open door and open, you can absolutely have an open door virtually, right? So like that
Sure.
is, and there are ways to facilitate. So really, making
Sure.
sure that you are
Sure.
thinking more deeply about it versus going to what might seem like the easy answer.
If I was a researcher, Alex, to your point, I would love to do research on the foggy backgrounds, the different backgrounds. To your point, cameras come into our home. We learn a lot about, you said, biases happen instantaneously. You make judgments about people immediately based on whatever is in the room that they're projecting from, right? And what is the gap between that comfort level and the tools that were given to us automatically all through COVID too, of the different backgrounds? And it was fun to play with a bunch of different ones. And then you see people who are still using them. Sometimes it's branding, sometimes it's business, sometimes you just have a mess behind you. But I think we've even gotten more comfortable with that the four of us are not blurry. We don't have a fake
Oh
background,
no, I have a fake
But
background. This thing right here, if I pulled that down,
well,
have you ever seen Labyrinth and the scene where there's the junkyard? That's what's behind the screen.
but half your head doesn't disappear when you move in,
That's right. Yes. Yes. This
you
is
know.
firmly on.
So
But yeah.
yeah. But also that vulnerability, we have to have it between us in those connections to build trust too, right? It's an excellent, excellent point. And sometimes that's easier in person, sometimes it's harder.
For sure.
Alex, can you maybe share a little bit, since we're talking about building trust, and maybe are there ways that one can, you mentioned earlier about if trust is broken, is it then harder to rebuild than to build initially? And what are some ways that you can kind of overcome barriers to trust, whether it's building trust the first time, the first time you meet someone, or it's building trust after there's been a little bit of a hiccup or a fracture? What are some ways to kind of overcome those barriers?
Yeah, it is not easy, right? It is something that requires a lot of work. So one of the big things first is for when, let's just say as a leader, right? You realize the trust is broken. Hopefully you're aware enough to realize the trust is broken, right? I think that's kind of the first step, right? But
Yeah,
if you
that's a
build
good point.
connection,
Let's assume that's there.
yes. If you build connection, if you know your team, you should know that, right? So I think it's even, first step is to really kind of figure out, what were your own motivations in that scenario. So kind of, doing a little bit of reflection
Mm.
yourself. I think it's going to the person or people whose trust has been violated, and just getting feedback and advice from them.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
And what's interesting is, this reminds me of, when we would have, interpersonal issues that came up in the workplace at a previous company I worked at. Um, One of the things that we would do is we would go to the person and ask them, what does a remedy look like for you? Like what would make you feel better about this
Mm,
scenario? Instead of making the assumption of what would be better, actually
right.
going to the person to say, like,
Right.
what would make you feel better? And the reason I think about that too is the research on apologies is very mixed. I mean, it can very much go either way. And regardless, people would
Mm,
rather just see the effort to understand and to take action. Um, so, if that person says specifically if that is something that they're seeking, sure, you can go on that, but like, it's not really about that. It's about that they can see that you understand where they were coming from, right?
Right.
So once you've
well,
had that
yeah,
conversation with them, it's actually implementing a plan to build the trust back up in partnership with the employee, having them hold you accountable, right?
Sure.
Checking in with them.
Sure.
So, it's not kind of as you might imagine, it's not like a check the box. Okay, I do this and then I do this and I do this. It
right.
goes back to, the connection, right? Like,
Yeah.
working on building that up again, and making sure that your efforts match your words. Like how do your
Right.
actions align, and making sure that you are getting advice, and not just from the employees. I think it's, important to always be seeking advice. Neuro leadership talks about how like power makes you stupid, right? And when you're at the most senior levels as a leader, that's when you get the least amount of feedback. When you're at middle management, that's when you get the most, right? That's when kind of self-awareness peaks. Once you get above
Right.
that, it's really hard to get candid feedback. So making sure that you have people around you who are giving you that, all
Mhm.
of that is going to help, you see the full picture of, whether your, actions are matching, what you're saying, and then that consistency piece. And then admitting when, look, we all have bad days. It's not that you have to be perfect all day, every day, in the aftermath, but can you notice much more quickly? Can you call yourself out, when things happen that it's like, you know what, like, I really did feel that in the moment, or, oh, like, I had so many different things going on. I am so sorry. That's not what I meant. Like just really addressing it head on as soon as possible instead of getting into defensive mode. Well, that's not what I meant. versus, oh, you
Digging
know
in
what?
deeper.
Yeah, versus, oh, that's not what I meant. Okay, let me explain myself. Let's talk through it. That's a whole different scenario, even just saying the same words.
Right.
Sure.
And I want to go back to what you said about admitting to, or not admitting, but hearing where the other person is, meeting them where they are, as we always talk about. But that gave rise to the active listening, right? That whole thing. And then the nomenclature, if I hear what you're saying or what I'm hearing you say, and people have adopted that language, but even that was kind of shallowed out because people know to say that. They sound like they're meeting you where you are. They sound like they're understanding the position you were in when this altercation happened, but they're just saying the words too. So that takes training and development and practice too, to be really sincere about those conversations.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Maybe I'm sorry, Rich, go ahead.
Nope. Go ahead, Ben.
I was going to say maybe we take another break, and then when we come back, we talk about measuring trust. I'm not going to let it
Yes.
go.
Ben is not
No.
going to let this go. I totally understand.
Well, I don't know. Um,
Right on. Okay. All right, folks, we'll be right back. Dysfunctional organizational cultures and poorly managed transformations can devastate employee morale and motivation, leading to disengaged employees, poor work quality, and the loss of your best people. The impacts to your organization include high costs, low productivity, and wasted resources. At Harmonious Workplaces, our purpose is to help you build the best workplace possible. We are advisors applying proven organizational development and industrial organizational psychology methodologies to help you become your best organization. We are doers, using time-tested principles to help you execute organizational change initiatives smoothly and successfully. To discover how Harmonious Workplaces can impact your organization, visit www.harmoniousworkplaces.com and book a free 30-minute information session with one of our consultants today. Again, that's www.harmoniousworkplaces.com. And we're back. So we have been talking with Alix Prassas about trust and building trust in our organizations. And Ben has been harping.
I've been
on-
the show nag
That's
today,
right.
trying to break through into how we measure trust. And I know I sound like a bit of a broken record, but I think it's one of those things, Alex, where you were saying at the top that organizations that have higher trust are seen to outperform their peers. They seem to do better. Just anecdotally, we've all been in environments where when we're on a team that has higher levels of trust, higher levels of camaraderie, we feel like we're working more in flow, we're doing better, we're producing better things. And so I'm wondering, is there a way to measure that so that we can see, is there an opportunity to improve? And then maybe we can talk about how one improves.
Yeah, so there are some scales out there. Like Adam Grant and colleagues have done some research around this, as well as several other folks. I think, when you think about kind of key questions, now this is going to sound really straightforward, right? But the leadership of my department can be trusted. I feel my leaders are committed to my success. So those are the biggest kind of like overarching questions. But the thing about trust is that, you can put stuff in an engagement survey, right? You can apply for Great Place to Work that is based on a trust index survey. Though I will say, what's interesting, and Great Place to Work, don't come for me, but if you look at the differences in demographics, as far as the responses to those questions, those aren't taken into consideration. They just see an overall number. So I will say, even if you do have an incredibly high score on some of these, kind of indexes that are out there, I still challenge you to really kind of dig in a little bit more and understand if there are gaps in employee experience between different groups. So those are kind of overarching, a couple of the survey type questions. Now,
Sure.
when you think about qualitatively, it really is digging into feeling like your organization is committed to you, your manager is committed to you, right? To your growth. Career development is a huge piece of trust. Like knowing
Mm,
that the company believes in you and wants to see you grow. Right. And I don't mean career development as like a nice, perfect, vertical ladder. Right. Like I just mean that they're
sure.
always going to foster your growth. So if you are curious about maybe another department, it's not necessarily about, oh, you automatically get a position in that department. It's, oh, hey, let me connect you with so and so in that department. And, if we could do some job shadowing for a day, let's go ahead and do, right? Like really kind of showing that you are thinking about them and you're fostering that open-mindedness. Trust, is only going to happen in those growth-oriented spaces. Um, and that's where we
That
get
makes
back
a
to
lot of
psychological
sense.
safety as well. Like that's, rooted in having that growth orientation. Um,
Yeah.
and I think
Yeah.
also recognizing that trust, first of all, people have different dispositions to trust. So I am someone who trusts everyone. Like I'm an optimistic person. I kind of just naturally trust people until they give me a reason not to, right? Whereas my husband is very much the opposite. And that's a good balance for us, right? He keeps me a little bit more grounded, but understanding if someone doesn't trust you off the bat, maybe probably has nothing to do with you, right? But either way, you still do the work to build the connection, and to make sure that you're
Hmm.
paying attention to how people feel. Just because someone isn't as trusting of other people doesn't mean you throw in the towel and say, oh, well, they just don't trust anybody. You say, no, like, let me kind of, tap into how I can do a better job of building trust. The other thing
Sure.
too, with global teams, right? So don't make the assumption based upon, some of the dimensions of the culture, right? Like maybe you go to Hofstede's like cultural dimensions and you say, okay, well, they're from this country and therefore, like these are the things that they believe, right? Or these are the ways in which, they're going to trust or not trust me. Cultural influences have a lower level of impact on trust than just leader behaviors, right? Like, how are you
Mm.
showing up as a leader? How are you demonstrating self awareness? So making
But
sure that you're diving
that's,
into those questions.
oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, but those leader behaviors, though, don't they, don't they represent as like artifacts of the culture? Don't they represent like what the organization culture is? Maybe not the geographical culture, but don't they represent what, what the culture is of that company or workplace, I should say.
Yeah. So, and I was speaking to national cultures, right? I was speaking to if you have a
Right,
global
right, right.
team, but absolutely the organizational culture is going to influence that. But with that, do your leader competencies, do those align with what you say your core values are? Are your core values, do they show up throughout the organization? So
Right.
another way to measure, right, is thinking about like, them answering a question around, what would you say our core values are? Right? Like,
Mm.
what do you
Hmm.
see in practice our core values being? Does that match what we say they are? In our
Yeah, that's
communications,
powerful.
how are we living our core values? Because anytime, policies in practice go against what they say their core values are, that's a dig at trust.
Sure.
There's so much you said there, Alex. We just published a white paper on signaling, and that signaling is what you're talking about. And it's the reason why vision, values, and missions are so important. People just push those things under the carpet. They think they're drinking the Kool-Aid if they believe in them. And then it goes back to personal development. What are your true values and are you living them? Is there a gap between who you are at work and who you are at home? Do you understand the values of the company? And to bridge the international cultural differences, are we rallying around the same mission, the same project?
one of
Right.
my
the
favorite
camaraderie for that mission.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. One of my favorite onboarding sessions. So, for a previous organization, I designed their onboarding, and I've actually designed onboarding a few different organizations. Just really love the opportunity to bring the new people in, right? But we
That's
would have a
awesome.
session on
What an
values,
opportunity.
and I would go around and I would just ask them, "What do you believe that your values are?" Like before we'd ever even talk about what the organization's espoused values are, like just what are your values? Tell me about a time when they aligned and when they didn't align with where you worked. And it was never about like, you don't have to tell me the
Ooh,
organization. Just, tell me kind of what did that feel like? And how did you kind of navigate? What did that do for your engagement? And what it also allowed me to do was understand, their angles for their work. And it allowed me to kind of make the connection for them. So they would bring up a particular value and I'd make the connection to what our values are. And I'd ask
Hmm.
them, you have these aligned values. So please call us out when you feel like it's not showing up. And we always had such rich discussions because you have onboarding cohorts, so people kind of learn a little bit from each other. And it builds a
Right.
personal connection when you're talking about your own personal core values.
Sure. Sure. And I love that
I,
you're doing those. I'm sorry, Bud, but real quick, that you're talking about doing some of the onboarding and cohorts because, like you said, that's I found that some when you do those the individual onboarding with just like a single person, it can be isolating sometimes. If that makes sense. Because it's just your experience, whereas there's this social aspect of culture that starts to take shape even when you have new people coming in. It's just we're all going through the ritual of the onboarding part, of becoming part of the greater organization, if that makes sense.
Culture. I did onboarding a program I designed for the IBD at Morgan Stanley, the investment banking division analyst, and they were just coming out of grad school, and they were so excited to be there. And every time I was getting a new group, it was like Christmas morning for me, and I just really loved to see how they were engaging. And then I got to tell them about everything from top to bottom and where to go and what to do. So yeah, it's a great thing. It's great that you got to design those programs too. It's very rewarding.
And with that, names sounds like a simple thing. You'd be surprised no
Yeah.
matter what age someone is, how much they light up when you bother to know their name right away. You know
It's
what
the
I
most
mean?
pleasant
So
sound in
like
the world, isn't it?
So I
Your own name.
back in grad school, so we're talking like 2007, 2008, I taught in a kindergarten and I learned very quickly the importance of learning names. And cuz they were not, I mean, if you didn't know their name, it was a problem, right? They would very much like call you out. And I also noticed at the same time that was when I was doing HR and retail. And I can't tell you because I would onboard all of the new folks. I can't tell you how many times 'cause I'd just say, "Hey, so and so." The amount of people that would come to me and say, "You're the only person that knows my name here." Or like, "I've never had a manager, like, know my name yet." And just what it would mean for them. So, making the effort or just something about them. I worked at a company where one of the founders, he was just such a good person. I'd never worked at a place where I was like, I would follow that person. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of leaders think they're that person, but, like, I mean,
For
just, like,
sure.
genuinely cared about everyone, and if he would see you in the hallway, he would stop. It wasn't like, "Oh, hey," and pass, like, he would stop, and he would engage with you, and he always knew something about you, and it was usually, like, something kinda random. So, I was in a dance company at the time because I would advertise my dance performances if anyone wanted to come, and he would, like, specifically ask me about dance, about performing. I had a colleague who she had dyed her hair and he'd be like, "Oh, like your hair." You know what I mean? He noticed her hair. Like it's like those little things, right? Um, those are all little just micro trust builders, knowing something about
Yeah,
someone. Like, when we talk about
that's right.
connection, you don't need to tell your life story. You don't need to get like super deep. It's just little things that show
Right.
that you care.
Yeah, makes sense for sure.
We were talking about onboarding and some of these things are related. Is there a way that you can hire for trust?
Um, so it's an interesting question, right? Because I feel like first of all, organizations have to earn trust. So, so if you're
Hmm.
talking about like any like employee, right? Like they don't necessarily owe you that trust. I think they owe, like explaining and having integrity, right? I think they owe kind of, like when you ask them questions, making sure they can give clear examples, right? And not looking like they're just kind of like schmoozing their way through it. So I think, maybe that's a piece of it, right? Like actually digging into their examples. So, at an organization, because culture fit is so nebulous and often just results in people, hiring people they want to have a beer with. We've heard that phrase, right? Or people who are similar to them, which you're never going to get
Hmm.
innovation if you're just hiring people similar to you, right? All you're
Right.
fostering is groupthink.
Group
Um,
think. Yep.
and, so kind of thinking through, instead of culture fit, core values alignment. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for core values alignment.
Sure.
So, challenging. So part of it was like, training the interviewers to really dig in, instead of someone just saying, oh, like, they looked at the values ahead of time. Oh, I believe in, X, Y, Z, right? Like really say like, oh, tell me about a situation at work where that was tested
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
where you feel like you really demonstrated that particular value, digging into that, so part of it is
Sure.
actually, training the interviewers. How do you dig into the soft skills, right? How do you dig into it's easy. The technical skills interviewing is super easy, right? That's pretty straightforward. You can tell right away if someone really knows what they're talking about there. But when it comes to the soft stuff, right? Like really like, getting an understanding of what does that mean to them? How does that show up? So that's kind of one of the big things that comes to mind when it comes to just general hiring, right? When
Yeah.
Mhm.
it comes
Makes
to
sense.
leaders, I think it's like holding their feet to the fire even more. How do they build trust with their team? How
Mm-hmm.
do they, if trust has ever been broken, because if they're being honest, that's always, that happens. It's natural in interpersonal dynamics. You think of friendships, relationships, any of those things, like it's going to happen at some point. Maybe not on a,
Sure.
really large scale level, but there's always something that happens, right? That kind of just chips away at the trust a bit. So having them talk through what did they do to repair it? First of all, how did they notice that the trust was broken?
Hmm.
Right.
Hmm.
And then once
That's
they
great.
did, what did they do? And then even once it seemed to be repaired, how did they sustain?
Right.
Right? So
Those
really like
star
challenging
stories,
them to
right?
walk through all pieces of that.
Yeah.
That's
Makes a
great.
lot of sense. Cool. Well, folks, I think we're kind of at that time, almost there. But Alex, thank you so much for being on the show. We really appreciate your being here, being fully present, giving us the Alex show, and uh. But
And
speaking of
building
which,
trust
and
with
building
us and our
trust,
audience.
that's right, absolutely. Um,
I would fall right in front of you.
right on. Could could you give us how can somebody contact you? That it's shameless plug time.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
All right.
Tell us about all your accolades.
Oh, no problem. I can talk about those forever. So absolutely find me on LinkedIn. Love to connect with folks. So you can find me. I know it's confusing because I go by Alix, Alix. And I have gone by that since I was 4 years old, as my parents love to tell everyone. But I actually have my LinkedIn under the legal name. So Alexandra, Alexandra. Last name Prassas. Feel free to connect with me. Would love to talk through any of this more. Very passionate, as you can tell, about this topic. I think that's really the best place. Like that's where I'm most active.
Cool.
And, Also, if you are a change manager, I am on the executive board of ACMP Midwest. So especially if you're in the Midwest region, would love to have you join. Feel free to reach out to me if you want to learn more. I also am a leader of a group called Culture for Chicago. It is a professional community of folks who are really passionate about workplace culture. Also happy to tell you all about that. Also just open to all types of conversations. So looking forward to connecting with everybody.
Cool. Awesome.
Wonderful.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
I have to get this episode ready because this week's class with my class at Trinity is we're talking about workplace culture. So I'm gonna have to
Awesome.
light a fire under myself to get this thing published.
Well, if you ever want a
So-
guest speaker, I bring in guest speakers all the time to like my classes. If you ever want a guest speaker, I'd be happy to do that.
That'd be fantastic.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Can I be the guest fly on the wall, Rich? I'll be the
Sure.
kid in the back that's just got like the hoodie and is taking notes.
I'll be the question asker in the back. Whoa.
Cool. All right, folks. Well, thanks again for joining us today. Thank you, Alex. You can find us at harmoniousworkplaces.com. Check us out. And until the next time, make change your friend. Thanks for listening to Harmonious Workplaces. You can find Harmonious Workplaces on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, Spotify, Amazon, Apple, and other streaming platforms. We'd love any feedback on whatever channel you find us on. Please rate, like, and share our podcast with your network, and remember to add Harmonious Workplaces to your list of favorites to get notified about each new episode. To contact Rich or Cheryl, please visit www.workbalanceconsulting.com. To connect with Ben, find him on LinkedIn or visit at www.harborsidestrategy.com.